I think I'm going to give it 25 seconds and off we go. Yeah. You know, this thing is called, what is it called? Sharpening the quill? I don't know whose idea that was. I've never seen a quill, have you? Do you work with one? And if you worked with one, would you sharpen it from time to time? Would that sharpen your wits as well? I don't know. You know, I was writing on a typewriter 50 years ago. Now I write on a computer. As for a quill, I don't know. Even a pen is hard. Anyway, no, I don't know if this is going to be the way it was supposed to be. I thought we were going to have a writing workshop or a writer's workshop. And I think, and I was sent a number of stories, 3 stories. I was supposed to judge them and to criticize them in the so-called writing workshop. Are those writers here? The ones who sent in the stories? One is here. Oh, 2. I have the names of Kifa, that's you, and Muhammad. You are the other one? Sorry? Kifa, you are one, right? No, I have Muhammad Taimur Sabi. Is he or she here? No. And Kifa, you are here. And Muhammad Sahib Sheikh, not here. So I don't see what the point of this is. I was supposed to spend the time criticizing, and the whole business of sharpening the wretched quill is to show people what they've done right, what they've done wrong. Perhaps it will arrive later on. And then I had asked everybody who was going to come here to be prepared to discuss a story by a writer called Flannery O'Connor. I don't think anybody's heard of that, have you? Has anybody? So what is the point of this then? I was going to start with a discussion, not just a lecture, but a discussion of a story called A Good Man is Hard to Find. And if you've never even heard of it, let alone read 2 lines of it, I don't see any point in discussing it, except that I can improvise and show a few. Yes? No, we too have read it. You too have read it? Yes. Very good, congratulations. But, you know, it'll be very boring for everybody else, but we will see. Yes, I will improvise. I've been doing this for 500 years, so I can manage. Let me just gossip for a while. I don't know, you don't even know who I am. I was born in Sialkot many, many years ago, and my parents emigrated to England soon after partition, and then from there, after some years, I was invited by the University of Texas to teach there, and I taught there for 38 years and retired a couple of years ago. And I come back here every year the last 4 years and sit in a place like this and talk to myself as I'm doing right now. All right. And what I did in Texas was teaching literature, English literature, and also what's known as creative writing. I don't know why it's called creative writing. Writing is writing. There are only 2 kinds of writing, good writing and bad writing. But people do creative writing. They feel good about it, you know. They sit down and say, oh my God, I'm a creative person. And so I assume that everybody who is here, or most people here who are here, are trying to write or have written or would like to write, etc. So please bear with me. And if you can't bear with me, just get up and walk out. It's very simple. All right. What I'm going to start by doing is to talk generally, let us say, about the idea of writing. We all have the desire to acquire some kind of fame, perhaps, or we like to imitate that which excites us. I think we look around as we grow up, and the world around us, we are curious about this world. What is it all about? What is reality? It is a puzzle. And so we respond, and each one has a different kind of a brain, and our brain responds to the stimuli around us, and we make up pictures of that which we experience and try to come to terms with those pictures, try to understand what that reality is all about. Some of us make paintings, some of us make sculpture, etc. All that we do is the making of signs and symbols in order to make that formula which gives us a sense of that reality. And whether we are scientists or artists, we are doing the same thing. We are reducing the world of our experience into that body of matter, signs and symbols, whether they're mathematical equations or they're words upon a piece of paper, which are saying this is perhaps what it is all about. We are creating a formula of language in order to understand the world around us. And everything is really a language, whether it is a religious explanation of existence, or whether it is philosophers talking about existence, or whether it's a poet writing about some little thing. It's all an attempt to understand what it is all about. All right, now as we create these works, we are first driven by the fact that something has appealed to us. Let me be, since I'm just gossiping and talking and waiting for people to arrive still, gossip a bit more about myself. When I was about 14 years old, this is way back before partition, I was living in Bombay. And like all boys of 14, I was interested in certain kinds of violent actions and loved going to the cinema where there were lots of sword fighting, etc. And I remember on the way to school, walking past the cinema, it had a picture of an Englishman wearing a black kind of a vest, and he had a sword in his hand, standing like this. And I thought, that looks interesting. I'll go and see that. And I went to see that, and it said Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I never even knew who it was. But the sword fighting, it was quite exciting. And as I saw that, some of the words began to do a little dance in my brain. And I got attracted to the idea of using words in a very special way. So what I'm saying here is that we're all drawn to this in a peculiar kind of a way. That something attracts us. Some of us perhaps would have been attracted by the picture or by a painting, by something else. And so we begin to imitate. Our first attempts at writing are imitation, just as we learn the mother tongue by imitating the mother. And so as we develop, the more we read, the more we are going to understand what it is all about. Now, I'm still improvising because I don't know how many else are coming here. Before we look at some of the work that has been given to me, let me say a few things about writing in general. One of the things that I do, I point out that the way in which to learn to write is simply by reading the other writers. And I'm going to start by giving you a few quotations from some of the writers who are important, who have changed things, who are what we think of when we think of writing. We've all heard of Chekhov, the great Russian playwright and short story writer. In fact, those of you who are writing short stories are probably writing very Chekhovian stories. The Chekhovian story is the one that has that middle, that beginning, middle, and end, has a straightforward narrative. It is a story in which something is happening to some people or the other, and we become engaged in their lives, and so on. The Chekhovian story, which develops in the second half of the 19th century, is the model for most stories that are written and published and are successful today. It is what is known as the traditional well-made story. These are labels, but the well-made story is a story that you will see in magazines, and you will see in most writers, people like Doris Lessing and all of those writers, very successful writers, some of them, they all write what is known as the Chekhovian story. Now, and this is why it is important to understand what Chekhov was doing. If you look at this book that I'm here to talk about as well, that just came out from Oxford University Press, I have a whole chapter on what Chekhov is doing in one of his short stories, how he constructs the story, and what I point out is some of the things that he does are very good, and some of the things are very bad. You're not supposed to say that, but they're very bad. And I will refer to some of those as well, perhaps a little later. But one of the best pieces of advice I can give to any other writer is not only, first of all, to read the work of that writer, but to read what else they have done, especially their letters. The letters of a number of writers, especially Chekhov, in the writing of fiction, and also a writer named Gustave Flaubert, the French writer of the 19th century, his letters. These letters are the best education that you can possibly have if you want to study to be a writer. Let me give you a few quotations from Chekhov's letters that have meant very much to me over the years, and let me talk about them, and perhaps this might or might not be interesting for you. Now, when people write stories, they think that they have to have an idea. Something is happening in society, some political event, some social upheaval is taking place, people are suffering, etc., and they want to respond to that. They have an idea for a story. Well, you don't really need an idea for a story. Stories are not necessarily based on ideas. They're based on words, on language. If you put down some image or the other and then follow that image with what follows from there, you will find that the story will write itself. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me quote what Chekhov says about the art of writing. He says, when writing stories, there are 6 considerations. Number 1, there should be no political, economical, social, verbal effusions. Of course, I am always I, each one of us. But I'm not here to preach to the world my way of looking at things. I'm only here to record something that I have experienced. And of course, part of my experience is the politics and the economics of the time and the social system of the time, etc., etc. But they are part of the way in which the emotions and the experiences of the characters are going to be responsive to certain things. The fact of the matter is that no work of literature that has attempted to create or has attempted to preach a certain idea has ever succeeded in changing the world. And anyway, forget that. Let me go on here. Chekhov's second dictum is there should be objectivity throughout. Now, objectivity is one of the most important words, especially in Western literature and especially in English literature. Objectivity. To try and create the objective image is what it is about. Number 3, says Chekhov, truth in the description of characters and things. Present the person as the person is. Do not be sentimental or do not try to glorify the person. Chekhov was living at a time of great revolutionary or pre-revolutionary moments in Russian history. and people were trying to reform the world at that time. People were sitting around in the cafes in Moscow and Petersburg, talking about what they could do and how they could somehow change the world. And Chekhov, who was a successful writer as a very young man, he was asked by people, why don't you, Chekhov, write good stories that show the peasants as beautiful, wonderful people so that we have a revolution? And Chekhov said, but that is not how they are. The people I see, because of their condition, are dirty. Because of their condition, they're often drunk. They beat each other up, etc., and they have a miserable existence. I can only describe what I see. So truth is very important. Number 4, he says, extreme brevity. Number 5, audacity and originality. Audacity is an interesting word here, and I would describe that as being reckless. There you are, you're writing a story. Have the courage to do that which is correct and that which is agreeable to your soul. Do not be intimidated by any kind of censorship or any kind of what the people might say, etc. I'm still passing time, and so here's another quotation from Chekhov. He's writing to another writer, his brother, in fact. May God save you from generalities. It is best to avoid descriptions of the mental states of your heroes. The effort should be to make these clear from their actions. Now, this is so simple and so obvious, and yet this is what is not paid attention to by many people. May God save you from generalities. You should never, never be using those generalizations which are like a comment upon the nature of things. And I will give you examples of this in a minute. You should always show reality as it is objectively perceived. Action is important. In this book and my chapter on writing, I start with the example of the films of Alfred Hitchcock, which everybody knows. And I point out, and maybe I should read a part of it, and that might be more to the point here. In this book, there's a chapter called A Short Guide to the Writing of Fiction. And I start with, perhaps this might be more interesting. You're no doubt familiar with the films of Alfred Hitchcock. You might have seen, let's say, Psycho or North by Northwest 2 or 3 times. But should you, while flicking the television remote in that mood one falls into of boredom and resignation, when there's nothing interesting on, accidentally hit upon one of Hitchcock's films again, you become instantly absorbed. You know, there you are sitting, nothing to do, bored, and you see that, oh my God, I've seen it before, but instantly you become absorbed again. Why is that? You know the story, you even remember several scenes, there's nothing there to surprise you anymore, and yet you're mesmerized. It's not just that you want to know what happens next, because you already know it from having seen the films before. What holds your fascinated attention is the presentation, the way in which the director shapes his narrative. A moment's reflection makes one conclude that Hitchcock's technique that makes his narrative so utterly absorbing is that he presents it as continuous action. Now, please remember that phrase, continuous action. When you're writing a story, continuous action. Don't stop it with generalizations. Don't stop it with some kind of profound, critical, philosophical comment. Get on with the action like Hitchcock does. I've often pointed out that if you were when you're writing a story. Imagine you are the lens of one of these cameras. The camera points at a person. Describe that person as the camera sees it. Move from there as the camera sees it. Keep it going for 20 minutes, and that is the end of your story. Don't stop it to say the sky was blue and the birds were singing and, et cetera, et cetera. Forget it. Of course they're singing then. If they're part of the story, they will be there if the camera sees it. But if you keep that objectivity going, you're going to write a very interesting story. It's going to be a very absorbing story. But you will say, oh, but what about my ideas? What about this great profound thoughts that I have? No. The way you see reality is the way in which your ideas already exist. Your visual reality is informed by the beliefs that you already have. Each one of us is a complex of prejudices. The prejudices are all kinds of things, ideas, philosophies, religions, etc. And it is that way that we see these objects before us. And the way in which we depict them, the way in which we choose to point the lens at one image rather than another, is because unconsciously we are choosing that which appeals to our own philosophical way of looking at things. Let me here introduce, I'd asked people, I told OUP that everybody who comes to this should have read this story, but obviously nobody has, or 2 or 3 people have. It's a story by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man is Hard to Find, and it begins with this paragraph. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. That is the first sentence. Now, that is not an image, that is a statement. I think she gets away with it because she gets on with it very quickly. But normally I would say, avoid that kind of statement as your first sentence in the story. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. The way she saves it is by immediately, a couple of lines later, introducing images. But she goes on here. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee, and she was seizing at every chance to change Bailey's mind. Bailey was a son she lived with, her only boy. Now, those are 4 lines, not a very good opening for a story, because she's telling you what the situation is. Grandmother didn't want to go to Florida, grandmother wanted to go there, and she was trying to convince Bailey. Bailey was her only son. These are statements made by the author to put you in the picture. And because it's very brief, you can get away with it, but normally it is not a good idea to do that. Let me, by comparison, give you another story. There was an image there. This is by Conrad. And I just want to read the first paragraph. First time we got into conversation was in the National Museum in Naples, in the rooms on the ground floor containing the famous collection of bronzes from Herculaneum and Pompeii. That marvelous legacy of antique art whose delicate perfection has been preserved for us by the catastrophic fury of a volcano. Now, there's a very different kind of an opening here. The opening here is suggesting, is simply getting the image of the first time we met was in this place. It was a National Museum. Now the writer is not saying anything at all, but by giving you the facts only, the objective facts, he's creating ideas. And the ideas are emerging at the unconscious level. We met in the National Museum. What is a museum? Museum is a repository of knowledge. Museum is a repository of the history of a place, of a culture. And then here there are these particular antique objects. And what are they? They are those objects that refer back to the lava that flowed down in that volcano that took place many hundreds of years ago, in which people are petrified. So yeah, human life is petrified there. Because of those images, there's a release of ideas that takes place, and of course, as the story proceeds, those ideas become very important. Let me just go on with a bit more of this friendly kind of story, because one or two people have read it. Now, after that statement that we have about the grandmother and her son, the writer then says, he, the son, was sitting on the edge of his chair at the table, bent over the orange sports section